Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Once again, thank you everyone for attending. Today's educational webinar is the ROI on data quality, brought to you by DataSource Consulting and EXL Company. And as you know, we are big believers in educating the data community on what we're passionate about and continuously learning about here at DataSource. Our speaker today is Sally McCormack, our Data Quality Competency Director, who I'll introduce in more detail here shortly. But first, let me tell you a little bit about DataSource Consulting and how and why we know about this topic. So we are a pure play enterprise data management consulting company with modern data architecture, decision intelligence, and about a year and a half ago, we were acquired by EXL Service as part of their analytics arm. So we're excited to now be able to offer end-to-end solutions from managing enterprise data to providing the deeper business insights. And as far as how we deliver, we divide our services into two categories. We have strategic work, where we're doing data governance, vendor tool evaluation, selection, data virtualization, and establishing programs. And then we've got the implementation arm, and this is the engineers and architects who work closely with internal client teams to help deliver on the recommendations we make through our strategy work. And that includes architecture and cloud and BI, decision intelligence, MDM, and of course, data quality. So with that, let me introduce your guest speaker today, Sally McCormack. Sally has extensive experience, over 14 years in data quality, data governance, data integration, test data management, data warehousing, and business intelligence. She's provided strategic and tactical leadership on numerous projects for various industries, and her peers and team really do turn to her frequently for her insight. As the Data Quality Competency Director here at DataSource, Sally is accountable for overall project success, establishing robust and repeatable delivery methodology, attracting industry-leading talent, and bringing technical and vertical solutions to market, as well as really driving that business development. So we're excited to have Sally speaking with us here today. And so this topic, the ROI on data quality, is crucial and something that we're asked about a lot, of course, because people want to know how a data quality project is going to help them decrease costs and increase productivity and business value. So could you flip to the agenda here, Sally? Thank you. So we'll go over the overall importance of data quality, determining the ROI on a DQ implementation, how to communicate the benefits of data quality, and leveraging the added benefits of data quality in your data governance organization. So thank you all so much for joining today. We're excited for this presentation, and I do want to mention that if you have questions, you can utilize the questions field at the bottom of your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll address those in the Q&A during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the presentation. And so with that, I will hand it off to Sally.
Thanks, Allison. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you so much again for joining today's webinar. So let's really get started in understanding the importance of data quality. I think it's very important to understand why it's important before determining that ROI. So, what I like to do is really go over some of the consequences of having bad data. According to TDWI, the cost of bad data is more than $600 billion annually in the United States. And with that, there are often a lot of different consequences, as seen here, of having that bad data. An example that I typically like to give is that if I get a mailer with an incorrect last name, I typically will disregard that company and won't do business with them. So if you think about it, if you have bad data, if you have your customers' information incorrectly stored in your system, you'll lose those customers and potentially have less market share because you don't have that customer base. Your customers won't be satisfied and they won't do business with you. That definitely leads to a negative company image as well. Another consequence of having bad data is, let's think about our sales data. If we have inaccurate sales data, for example, we may not really have the correct market share, and we might think that we're doing better in one area versus another. So we may not focus our efforts, and we'll have some missed opportunities in marketing or targeting a specific group of people. Along those lines, we also have financial inaccuracies and mistakes. A lot of times, we have to report on our data, and if you're a publicly traded company, you need to make sure that your numbers are correct. Imagine if your stakeholders, realize that your numbers were incorrect and your data was incorrect. They likely wouldn't want to continue to invest in your organization. Also, there are a lot of different penalties that you can really have to focus on here in terms of government, industry, regulations. For example, in the financial space, there's CCAR regulations. So if you don't have your data accurate in your system, you could really face a lot of these different consequences. So, along those lines, what are the costs of having a low quality data? 50% of companies aren't aware that they have problems, and they don't recognize that with these data quality issues, there is value in fixing them. And those who do realize that they have a problem and want to fix them, 88% of them don't see the direct effect of inaccurate data on their bottom line. So really, what does that mean? We can see some examples here of the bottom line. I'll take a basic example. If you have an incorrect or bad address, you would have the potential of not only missing the opportunities of reaching that customer and gaining more revenue, but also you might be spending additional costs in having returned mail. So if you're sending a direct mail piece to a potential customer, you're spending money on the return mail cost as well as sending them another mailer once you do actually have the correct address. And we'll go into more details around what some of those different data quality impacts are. So here's just a basic example. This is a list of customers, and here we can actually see that there's invalid addresses. So we have address elements in different fields. We're missing data. We have duplicate contacts. We see multiple John Smiths. Data isn't in a standard format. The phone number's off. We've got the postal code in address 3 when that likely should be in address 4. So what does that really mean? Well, going back to our consequences, again, we have missed opportunities in reaching out to our customers if we don't have their address information. We could be making, misguided business decisions. We've got 3 John Smiths in our system. Do we think that we actually have more customers than we really do? There could be a low customer satisfaction and a negative company image for potential clients if they're receiving mailers that are inaccurate or multiple mailers. So we understand why it's important, but why does this bad data potentially exist in the system? A couple examples here. We've got potentially multiple sources of data stored across different systems. For example, you might have customer information stored in a CRM system. Maybe you might have it in your ERP. How do you know which data is correct? How do you know what your source of truth is? So with that, if you've got multiple systems with the same data, you could be providing inaccurate data in downstream processes. Another reason why bad data exists is that there are now massive data volumes, with big data. It's very difficult to manage that big data if we don't know where it is, what that data fully looks like. We don't have that full understanding, and we don't know where it's actually flowing. So bad data can pop up at any point in time. And I'm sure you've experienced this in your organization before. There's typically legacy data that still exists because we don't know what the impact is of updating it. This data may not even be required anymore, but it'll remain in the system because we don't know what to do with it and we don't want anything to blow up. Another reason why you might have bad data is that we might have to purchase additional third-party data to supplement what we have internally. While we can control our internal data with this external data, we can't necessarily update that data set. So we are paying for this, so we expect it to be accurate and correct, but how do we really know? What happens if your third-party vendor decides to update the data set and not tell you? What will impact your ETL process if the data is in a different format, or if we're getting additional columns, for example, of data? Another reason why we might have bad data is that we don't have the people who truly own and understand the data. Without these owners, how do we know if the data is correct, and how do we understand the impact of the business? If we don't have those people, we can't really determine if it really matters if our data is bad or not. So let's get to the meat of this presentation here. How do we calculate and determine the ROI of data quality? So I want to start off with just defining what ROI is. I've taken some different examples here, different definitions. That we have the dictionary definition. I'm not going to read the whole thing. We've got the Wikipedia definition, and then we have the Gartner. Financial gain expressed as a percentage of funds invested to generate that gain. And there's a common theme here. Obviously, it's about the investment. We're trying to figure out what that return on investment is. So in order to calculate ROI, we really need to think about data quality as an investment. We have to determine what the value is of data quality and also what the costs are, and focus on the people, the process, and technology required to implement a data quality solution. So here, this is just the standard ROI calculation, but we're going to really focus on how do we determine the value and the costs that go into this equation. So, how do we determine that value? So according to Gartner, data is valued at 20 to 25% of enterprise value. So what does that really mean here? Basic example. If your organization is valued at $1 billion, 20% of that is $200 million. So your data is valued at that amount. And in this case, there's different types of values that we can look at. The most common one is going to be your monetary value. It's the easiest to determine. People can easily translate that, and we can easily put that into our ROI calculation. Another example of a value is the human value. That really refers to the quality of life, satisfaction, customer satisfaction, for example. Another example is the mission accomplishment. So if you are working for a nonprofit organization, you're not necessarily going to care about your bottom line and the costs or the revenue associated with what you're doing. So here we're thinking about, am I meeting my mission? Am I serving my purpose here for my organization? So I just want to give some examples of where we can find the value in our organization. And the key thing here is to really focus on the business value. Cost, for example, is something that's very easy to look at. We can look at our operating costs. How much does it cost right now for us to fix bad data? But what's more important is to really translate that into revenue. With bad data, are we missing out on potential revenue, on potential market share? I'm not going to go through all of these here, but for example, there's compliance, right? With the government, there might be specific regulations, industry regulations, like I mentioned earlier with CCAR, for example. There's also, CMS, for example, will fine different healthcare organizations if they don't have correct provider information. A lot of times we can look at what happens if we have bad data in a regulatory environment. There might be potential fees, going back to the consequences of having bad data. We might have to pay a certain fee or penalty if we're not providing accurate data. We can also look at the productivity. So for example, how quickly can we work through different data issues? We can translate that into the number of person hours, for example, or the number of times that it might take for, let's say, if you have a customer in your call center that you're speaking with, how long does it actually take for you to be on the phone with that customer? Because that throughput is important, because you're not only paying for that CSR, but you're also paying for the amount of time that you're spending with each customer. You could be getting through these calls a lot quicker if you had better data to rely on. And again, going back to that, negative company image, right? We want to make sure that our customers are satisfied, but we also want to make sure that our employees are satisfied. If our employees are constantly resolving the same data quality issues, are they going to be happy doing their job? How can we help them improve their job and then focus on not just the data quality issues, but also defining other business processes? And, so these are just some examples. It's not the full list, but I want to make sure that you all have a sense as to where you can go to look for that value. It's not going to just be on the operating costs. You can really look at these different areas with the monetary, the human element, as well as the mission accomplishment. So how do we look for business value? There's two different approaches here. And, the first approach is the top down. So what we would do first is look at a business issue. One of the things with data quality is, I like to say, you don't want to do data quality just to do it. You have to have some business problem that you're trying to resolve. So we may have that business issue already defined. What we then need to do is look for the root cause. So what is that process that needs improvement, for example? Do we need to have a system where we're essentially having a restricted list of valid values? Or do we need to update our training so that our people are entering in the data correctly? So once we determine the root cause, we'll improve that data quality, and then in turn, we'll improve business results. Another way to look at it is going from the bottom up. And that really starts with doing data profiling. So looking at your data, understanding what it looks like, looking for any anomalies that might exist in the data, and not necessarily knowing what that business impact may be quite yet, but just seeing, what, I see data here that we've got incomplete records or null values. Is that important? Do we need to have this this field populated with data? So it's really doing that data analysis and data quality assessment to begin with. And once you have started doing that data profiling, looking at the data, we then move on to the next step with uncovering those issues and understanding what that business impact is. So, basic example, going back to our customers, if I find that during data profiling, we're missing address line 2, is that important to me or not? Well, maybe address line 2 has the suite number. So if we're missing the suite number, we won't be able to reach our potential clients or even potentially our vendors if we're trying to bill people, or suppliers. So really understanding the issue, the data issue itself, and tying it to the business impact. We would then improve the quality of the data by updating processes, updating training, whatever it is that root cause for that issue. And then in turn, we would improve business results. So there's two different approaches here. It just depends on your organization. You could go either way. A lot of times when you're taking data quality from an IT perspective, you will start with doing data profiling because we have access to the data, we've got the tools, and we don't necessarily know what the business processes are quite yet. But we do definitely need to get to that business impact eventually if we start from the bottom up. So with data quality, a lot of times, we'll have a result. We need to have for example, 97% of customers have a valid address. Right now, we have only 50% of them with a valid address. Another example would be, there must be accurate and no duplicated provider records. Or, our product units and unit of measure must be correct. So that's great. We know that we need to have accurate data. We need to have a high percentage of accurate data. But how does that really translate to value here? So in our first example, right now, these are just rough numbers. We've got, it costs $10 for return mail. So with 100,000 total customers in our customer base, well, given that 50% of our addresses are currently invalid, it would cost potentially $500,000 with return mail. And this is just the return mail, right? I haven't even included the cost of sending a mailer again to them once we have corrected the address. So it could even be more. And with DQ in place, if we get our 50% up to 97%, it would still cost us $30,000 in return mail, but we'd be saving $470,000 with that return mail cost. Again, that's really just the cost of return mail, not thinking about the potential impact of what lost revenue is. So you can take that into consideration as well. With our provider records, CMS can fine up to $100 per day per provider if the data is inaccurate. And right now, CMS, they state that typically 55% of records are inaccurate. And so if we take an example of 500,000 providers, that could potentially lead up to $27,500,000 a day. So that is a huge amount. And this obviously is probably an extreme case, but it could cost us that much every day. And this example, with the product units. So right now, it would cost us $100,000 if the package measurement is off by 2 pounds. So what do I mean by that? Well, if a product is supposed to be 1.5 pounds, but the product is listed in the system as 4 pounds, for example. So we're trying to ship our product out on pallets, and the pallet, it can only handle a certain measurement. Can only handle a certain weight. It can only handle a certain height, and width. So different dimensions, right? So right now, if it's off, it would cost us $100,000 because we're accounting for extra space that isn't needed, and we're not getting as much product off in terms of shipping it out as well. So if we look at 50,000 products, for example, if only 2% of that number is incorrect, it could cost us up to $10 million in additional transportation costs. Those are huge costs, and we're able to really translate what our results are, the results that we're looking for, into value that we can put into our ROI calculation. So, really, we have to make sure that we translate it into some type of value and not just take it for what it's worth. A lot of times we'll implement data quality, and it's great. I'm so glad that we have 90% of customers that are valid, but what does that really mean? And so these are just some examples of how you can translate those results to specific value. In addition to understanding what the values are, we need to understand what the costs are with the data quality implementation. And at a very high level, we'd look at it at a people, process, and technology point of view. So with people, we have to take into consideration how much it would cost to support a data quality implementation. And that's not just the initial implementation, but just also support ongoing. So the people would be, do I need to have an analyst or data steward? Do I need to have a data quality developer to develop these processes? Do I need to have a data quality administrator? So with those, we can look at the costs associated with the people involved to support a data quality implementation. In terms of process, this may not be directly related, but there are hiring costs, right? So in order to fill the roles, we need to work with our HR department and hire those people. Or we might need to work with others to supplement in other organizations. So if you have a group of people in your IT department and there's another business unit, you might actually have to tap into their department and bring those people on. So that there's cost to having that as well. There's also training costs. When you're initially standing up the data quality process, you have to train people on the tool, but also in the overall methodology and process itself. And there's a lot of pieces to it. And typically, you'll go through a process of, doing that data profiling, for example, identifying what the issues are, defining what the rules should be, and then implementing, monitoring those issues, and then taking the necessary corrective action. So when you get to the point of taking that corrective action, there might be change management involved. Do you need to go through a change management board, for example, if you need to update certain data sets? A lot of times we can flag the records, but we can't update the data directly. So those are just some of the additional costs when you're implementing data quality from a process perspective. And also, the easier cost that we can identify is the technology component. So how much does it cost to purchase the tool itself, the software, and then also how much does it cost to implement it and maintain? If you're purchasing a tool, there will be some maintenance costs, year after year. You also have to consider the infrastructure. So, what servers are required, databases, and with that, what admin support do you need for your servers, databases, et cetera. So now that we know what our value is and what our cost is, I want to take the examples that I presented earlier and come up with that ROI. So with our invalid addresses, again, we're looking at the potential savings here, but we could look at revenue, we could look at different types of value. We don't just have to look at the savings. In this case, with our invalid addresses, we would potentially save $470,000 by implementing data quality so that we can correct our addresses so that it's now 97% accurate. Very rough estimate here is $500,000. Obviously, the cost to implement will depend on the software. And I'll say too, you don't necessarily need software, but it definitely helps when you're implementing data quality to have something so that you can more easily automate your processes. And this cost also includes potential headcount and just the resources needed to fully implement the data quality solution. So here, it's just a very rough $500,000 estimate. So if we were just to focus on invalid addresses, this probably isn't going to be worth it to us. We wouldn't be saving money. It would cost us essentially $30,000, and our ROI would be a negative 6%. Now, if we go to our inaccurate provider example, that was $27,500,000. The total savings here would be $27,000, and our ROI, where if we subtract the cost from the value and divided by the cost, it would be, 5,400%. And it's a big number because, it could potentially cost us over $27 million to have inaccurate provider records. Similarly, with the product information, if the units are off, then we would potentially be saving $9,500,000 and having an ROI of 1,900%. If we add those all together, then this may not be typical of your business, but there are definitely various data quality issues across different departments, different business units, different data domains. So when you're calculating your ROI, it would make sure to include how DQ can impact all areas of the organization and not just one. So if we're looking here, we can see if we combine it. we could potentially save over $37 million. And that ROI would be 7,494%. Now, year one, the cost to implement and to support DQ will be higher just because you're initially acquiring the tool and the software, and you're installing and configuring it. Subsequent years, you won't have to do that. You'll just have to pay for maintenance and headcount to support. So your ROI would actually increase over time. And one of the things too with your cost is not just with the implementation of the tool set, but you may find that your data stewards or your data champions, for example, are now clear as to what the rules should be. At the beginning, you're going to spend more time in defining the rules, so your initiatives will take some more time in implementing data quality. But once you have that down, a lot of it is very repeatable, and you won't have to spend as much time with your data quality solution and adding additional rules and logic and data. So with that, we understand how to calculate the ROI, and how do we now communicate that? And to do that, we want to make sure that we develop a solid business case. So with the business case, we want to make sure that we state the business problem. Again, going back to data quality, we need to ensure that we're looking at a business issue or a business problem that we're trying to solve. So clearly state that in the business case. Then we want to provide in this business case, what is our future desired, your desired future state? So if we have a problem with our addresses, we want to make sure that we have 90% accuracy of addresses. The business case will definitely need to show how we'll solve the problem as well. So in this, we'll mention with data quality, we will standardize and validate our addresses. So we'll need to have a data quality tool that does address validation and any additional reference data that we might need. If we want to look at data from USPS, for example, we might need to purchase some additional reference data to look up to that database. And then here in the business case, we also want to make sure that we outline the benefits or the value. So going back to our value before, where we were trying to find where it was in the organization, that could be, well, we'll increase our revenue by X dollars. We'll decrease our operating costs. We'll actually improve customer satisfaction. We'll be able to reach out to multiple customers and we'll retain them. So it won't cost as much for us to acquire and retain customers with better data. And then, in the business case, with the cost outlined and how we'll solve the problem and the value that we've outlined, we can demonstrate the ROI very easily with that calculation. So with that business case, we want to make sure that we communicate the following as well to our stakeholders. The business case has to align to business goals. So if you have an initiative that's going on right now in your organization, let's say we're implementing a new CRM system, that would be the perfect time to align a data quality tool, because you can show how quickly and how effective it would be to have a data quality solution as we're implementing CRM, because we're standardizing our addresses. We have one source of truth for our data, for example. So it's much easier to align the data quality program with something else that's going on in the business. We want to make sure that we identify the impacted business areas. If we're implementing a CRM system, who is actually impacted? Well, potentially our sales force, right? They want to be able to log into their CRM and look at the different prospects that they've reached out to. It'll also impact, potentially our sales team, not just our sales operations team, I should say. They're doing analytics on our sales information. So really understand all the different groups and all the different business areas that may be impacted. We also want to make sure that we prioritize on what's critical. If we are, again, looking at CRM, we need to make sure that we're looking at specific data elements that will bring value early on. Addresses is a very, easy thing to validate, so we can prioritize that at the top of the list. What might not be as simple and straightforward is looking at, let's say, customer segmentation. That might take some more time, so we might put that lower on the list. Or if we're looking at, customer contact information, not just address, but let's say phone number. Phone number is more difficult to validate, so that might not be as important. But we want to make sure that the customer name is accurate, so we can look at standardizing that quickly. So if we're able to prioritize the critical data elements and show the value early on, you're more likely to be able to sell your business case. And that's what we really need to do here with the business case, is that we're communicating the value and we're essentially selling it, and our stakeholders will want to buy it. And another thing here is just make sure to focus on not just the data, but also the people, process, and technology. Data quality isn't just the tool. It's not just the process. It's everything. It's the data, the people, process, and technology. So here I listed just some examples of how data quality would impact the business. So we would be able to reduce operational costs with resolving consistent data issues manually and storing bad data. If you have a lot of bad data in your system, then the cost associated with that, you can easily remediate that by having better quality data and removing that legacy data, for example, that I mentioned earlier. Another example is we'd be able to increase productivity with having the repeatable processes and reusable code. A lot of times with the data quality implementation, yes, we'll focus on specific subject areas or data domains, but a lot of those rules can be used across the different areas. It can be simple enough where it's just validating that the data is populated. That can easily be used across different data domains, and with the tool, it's much easier to reuse that code, and it will be much quicker to implement a data quality solution for that area. We can also decrease compliance risks with having bad data. I mentioned the different penalties that we might face. So we'll be able to tie that back to the value of having that data quality solution in place. We'll have better decision making. We have trusted, higher quality data, and the business will be able to make decisions that will potentially increase market share, which in turn would increase revenue. And our customers would be more satisfied with accurate and complete data. I go back to the example of getting a mailer with the wrong name, right? So my married name is McCormack, and I've been married for almost 9 years now, and I've changed my name a long time ago. And when I get mailers with my maiden name, I essentially just disregard that because I know that they have a bad customer master and I don't do business with them. So, all of these are just examples. There's many more out there. It really depends on your business, but these are ones that can be used to really sell your business case and communicate the added value of having a data quality solution. So, want to tie data quality and data governance together. There's a lot of added benefits to having data governance along with data quality. Some organizations will start with having data quality and then go into a larger data governance organization. Some will have data governance and have data quality underneath it already. So how do they fit together? Data governance is very business focused. We're going to be more preventative in nature. It's making sure that we have the right people that are accountable. We have the right understanding of the data. And data quality, we are a little bit more reactive and we're more data focused. So we're looking at the data itself, doing that data profiling and discovery. we're cleansing it, we're monitoring it, but we need to have the people from a data stewardship perspective to identify what those rules should be and what corrective action is needed. And together, data governance will help optimize the value of data in that organization. So going back to that enterprise value, from Gartner, right? That we need to make sure that $200 million of our data is really optimized. We want to make sure to be able to make the right decisions and use our data as an asset. So with data quality, we would have specific policies and procedures that the data governance organization would help define. We could define what the critical data elements are, and the policies and procedures would include who's involved, what tools are used, the actual steps as well. And these are just some examples of different policies and procedures that you can develop. I think one of the key things here is, the reporting and monitoring of data quality. So here, the data quality metrics, just, some basic examples of how you can report off of how well your data quality initiative is doing. So we can look at our data profiling results and look at the number of null values. And that's pretty simple to do. We can look at the number of duplicates. And we can look at how long it takes to derive results from a given data set. So these are just some of the basic data quality metrics. And a lot of times with data quality, there are common data quality dimensions. These aren't all the dimensions. These are just some examples, and it's not in any order here. But with our completeness dimension, we can look at the number of null values as a metric, and then the issue that it represents is really the inaccurate addresses. We can look at accuracy and determine what data is incorrect or out of date. We can look at the number of duplicates. So this is just very high level. There are so many different dimensions out there, and different data quality organizations will have their rankings of the dimensions themselves. But these ones are the typical ones that you would find. And then with the data quality program itself, we can develop metrics to see how well we're doing in terms of how much of our data quality solution implemented. So have we included all the different sources of data and vetted them through and they're fully approved? We can look at verification. So how effective is our data quality implementation right now? How mature of an organization are we? And then also looking at the validation metrics. So what are the cost savings? Are we achieving that value proposition that we defined earlier? These program level metrics can be bundled up with data governance, and oftentimes data governance organizations will have a recurring data council meeting. So these can be reported in that council meeting. It can be reported on a yearly basis, just to show the progress to your stakeholders. And I just want to call out too just some of the things that the metrics provide. It shows what the level of engagement is between business owners and the stewards. It shows the level of policy enforcement and compliance. It provides execution measures to indicate if follow-up is needed, misalignment of priorities, ineffective processes, and business value attainment. So with the added benefits of data quality, we can easily show that through metrics reporting, through data governance. So that is the presentation for today. I'd like to open it up to any questions.
Sally, thanks so much. That was so informative and really did help illustrate how organizations are going to benefit from these data quality implementations. We did have a number of questions come in through the questions portal here, so let's get to those. Try and have time to answer as many as possible here. The first one is, what areas do companies typically focus on when they want to create a pilot program to demonstrate ROI? Are there specific areas that may have more business relevance?
So that will really depend on your organization and your industry. Typically, customer is an area that is very easy to look at, but I will say a lot of times it's difficult to define what a customer is, but the customer piece of it is very easy to look at because if we're in business, we need customers. So that's a typical focus area. I'd say also if you have a product, that is another area that is a good starting point, because if you have, and a product isn't just a cell phone, for example, right? It's not going to just be the iPhone. The product will have all the components, tied into the iPhone itself, all the chips and the glass that's on top of your phone, the casing. So a product can be hundreds of thousands of products in your system. So we do see a lot of companies focusing on customer data and product data to begin with. But it really does depend on your business problems and issues that you have.
Okay, great, thank you. And how long does a typical data quality implementation take?
Again, I'm going to say it depends. So it will depend on what tool you purchase, how robust of a solution you're interested in implementing, the resources that you have, the subject areas that you want to include, the number of source systems, the number of rules that you want to apply, the skill sets of the resources that you have. So it depends. I will give you an example of what we've done in the past. I like to call it data quality quick start, and that it's usually focused on one or two subject areas, let's say maybe like 30 rules, and with the installation and configuration of a tool, defining the data quality framework, I'd say we could be as quick as 3 to 4 months, and that could then span multiple years. But I'd say on the if you have everything in place, 3 to 4 months would be the minimum amount of time that you would need.
Okay, thanks, Sally. And kind of adding on to that last question, how many people does a typical implementation have involved?
So that would also, again, depend. If we were to do a quick start, I typically would want to make sure that we have a data quality lead or architect, because that person would be looking at the overall architecture and framework, not just the tool, but also the methodology that you're going to follow. So you'd need to have at least that one person. You need to have at least a developer. You also need to make sure that you have the appropriate data stewards or analysts who understand the data, and that could range depending on your organization and how many people you have per area. But from a technical side, I'd say you'd need at least 3 people. And then that could vary in terms of just how much you're trying to accomplish within the time frame.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sally. And next question here is, how do we calculate the cost of a data quality solution so we can present a number along with the ROI?
So for the cost, I mentioned the people, process, and technology pieces of it. So the cost, for the technology, you can look at, obviously the vendors will provide the cost for the software itself, the maintenance costs. You can get that information easily. The architecture itself, so any database or servers, you'd have to work with your infrastructure team to get those costs. But in terms of the people, I gave the number of people that would cost for the implementation. So you could take that, look at the time it takes to implement, and then determine the people cost that way. And then who would be required to support it long term. What we typically do, based on the organization, we'll go in and recommend what that structure would look like, the people that are involved, and how much of their time is required. And then we can look at the costs associated to that.
Okay, great, thank you. We'll have time for one more here, and we do have some extra questions, but we will publish all of these to the blog in the Q&A format so that anything we didn't get to will be available online. So the last question for today is, who can I work with to define the cost of bad data, like returned mail or rework?
So that you'll likely have to work with people in the business, right? So if you are looking at the returned mail, I'm sure your marketing department knows how much it costs to send the mail and how much it costs for that to be returned. So you need to go into the different business units and look at the cost of that bad data for the return mail. For the rework, you would then understand how much time these individuals are taking to potentially redo these mailers, for example. So with that, you can talk to the appropriate business units as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Sally. That is going to do it for questions for today. As always, we will be posting the recording to the website, so anyone who registered will get an email with a link to the recording as soon as it's live. If you have any questions, Sally, do you want to go to the contact slide there real quick? You can reach out to Sally, and feel free to ask any questions. We have additional generic contact information on our website as well. So keep an eye out for that email. And then we do have another webinar coming up a week from today at the same time at 11. We are going to be going over our lessons from the trenches, moving to Snowflake. And that will be with Eric and Jerry, our cloud and data integration competency directors. So that will be a good one. Thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks.